Hello everyone, I'm Chelsea Harris and I'm founder of this beautiful company Inspired Mama. And alongside this, I'm also mother to 4 little energetic boys. Now, as both an entrepreneur and a mum, I really do intimately understand the challenges of trying to balance a thriving career with your family life. Now, my journey within health actually began 2 decades ago. And I have a lot of experience as a student support worker within a high school. And that combined with my own motherhood experiences actually led me to create Inspired Mama. Since then, I've dedicated myself to training as a health coach, a mindset coach, a personal trainer, and also a nutrition coach. This extensive training has allowed me to support busy mums and their families for the last 7 years. And as a result, I've been coaching and training women worldwide, providing streamlined health solutions and personal development programs. Now, the Inspired Mama programs address the 3 core challenges that modern families face, which is trying to manage their stress effectively, improving our communication, and just creating this harmonious home environment when we're not fatigued, we've got plenty of energy, and we feel like we've got mental space for ourselves and for our children. So today I'm really excited to dive into a crucial topic for all of us within our family wellness journey, and that's stress management for the modern woman and her family. Today we're going to explore how stress impacts not just us as individuals, but also our entire family unit, and how we can create really positive coping strategies for us and our kids. In this session, we're going to discuss the science behind stress and how it affects our brain and our behaviour. And most importantly, we're going to talk about how it influences our children's behaviour. I'm also going to share some really practical strategies to identify stress in yourself and in your loved ones and provide some tools that are going to help you manage it effectively as a family. We're going to explore the importance of creating open communication channels with your children and how you can support them in developing their own stress management skills. By the end of this training, you're going to have some really actionable steps to create a more balanced, supportive family environment. So if you're ready to transform your family's approach to stress and boost your whole well-being, then let's get started. Within this module, we're going to be talking about keeping your stress in check. And I'm talking about your stress, your partners, your extended families, and also predominantly your children. So we know that as parents, our emotional state impacts everyone in our family, and this particularly impacts our children. We know that when we're in a heightened state, our children experience heightened emotions as well. As a mother, when you're stressed and you're trying to get your baby to sleep, your baby won't go down to sleep because they can sense that there's something wrong when they're laying on you. This is true within the family home too. If we're stressed when we're in the kitchen or when we're in the car or when we're in the living room and we're navigating the children, they too are going to be heightened. And so their behavior escalates as we get more worried or as our reactions change. Small things like having a bad day at work or having money worries or possibly having a fight with your partner, or even having bad traffic when you're running late, those things can really impact us. Life is full of big and small stresses. All of these minor events can change our moods, and our children are tuning into them all the time. We have to remember that what we fear, they learn to fear, and how we react is how they learn to react as well. And this doesn't mean that as a parent we need to hide our emotions, but we do need to be mindful of how we're managing them and how we're responding to them. Unfortunately, toxic stress within a family has the potential to change a child's brain chemistry, change their brain anatomy, and even their gene expression. And so it's really important that we learn how to manage our basal stress line so that we can teach our children those strategies as well. Now, the field of neuroscience has revealed a lot of information about how the human brain works and why we're so vulnerable to stress. As humans, we've evolved over thousands of years from a species that only survived because we were good enough at protecting ourselves from threat. But the thing is, in Western society now, the threat is rarely located in our physical environment. And so we live in this legacy of a powerful negative bias. We're constantly on the alert for threats around us. And the downside of this is that our brains were born with many design features suited for a completely different era, when on a daily basis, really threats to our life were routine back then, and they're just not now. Given that our mental wiring hasn't changed, our physiological responses still exist. And so often when we're having small threats like being late to work, or the children making us run late, or them not listening to us and not brushing their teeth, or small things like that can actually trigger us in the same way that we would have been triggered in our past when our lives were actually in threat. Now, in case you hadn't noticed, when we're in this state of stress, we actually have very little control over our thoughts. Once our brain gets hijacked, our thoughts run wild and basically it takes over. So our genetic makeup and past experiences play a really big part in actually determining the thoughts that we have now and how we interpret these experiences. So only 10% of the activity in our brain is in our conscious awareness, which is why when simply attempting to just change your thoughts, it's bound to fail. So we have to start to change it on a subconscious level, which is why we bring into the practices the non-negotiables around managing our stress state. Now, there's 10% of thoughts that we're in charge of, whether they are optimistic thoughts or those that come in the form of worry or negativity, is actually largely beyond our direct control. And many of the thoughts that we have today are 95% of what we experienced yesterday. So there are many recurring thoughts again and again if we're not consciously aware of them and trying to change them and pulling ourselves up on them. Because our thoughts are innately linked to our emotions, which originate well beneath our conscious awareness, in the area of the brain called the limbic system, many of them happen just from repeat and out of automation. So there's a really small part of the brain called the amygdala, which is vulnerable to stress. And basically what happens is it acts like a smoke detector in your brain. It's constantly vigilant for what might pose a threat and get in the way of an outcome that we want. And that's the key. What's posing a threat or getting in the way of an outcome. So the problem is that the amygdala, which is the stress response in our brain, can fire up over very small incidents because it sees them as a threat. Small things like kids not brushing their teeth when asked, kids refusing to go to bed, possibly waiting in a really long line at the post office, being on hold to a company for a really long time. When we hear a particular tone in a voice from someone who's close to us and we don't think that they're respecting us. What happens is when the activity in the amygdala increases, the level of cortisol in our body also rises. And this diverts blood away from the areas of the brain that we rely on to think clearly and problem solve. So all of a sudden, we cannot think clearly and we cannot problem solve. This is the stress response. And it may have helped our ancestors escape predators, but we aren't being attacked by predators now. And so it rarely helps us deal skillfully with the challenges that we actually face in our day-to-day life. Now, what you'll find in your booklet there is a page that's dedicated to identifying what are the small triggers that come up for you on a daily or weekly basis within these areas. So I want you to think, what small incidents does your amygdala get fired up over, whether you be at home, at work, or sometimes when you're in public? And I want you to start to jot them down and realize, what is that stress response coming from and when is it being triggered? Now, given that we have a really strong bias and we favor remembering and detecting those negative memories or those negative emotions, this means that we're more likely to remember those times when we felt more negative emotions. So we actually are in tune with these negative emotions more, and we seem to retain them and remember memories around them. So those moments when we felt anxiety, worry, irritability, anger, doubt, or resentment, those emotions and those memories stick with us. So unfortunately, we're wired to remember those events for years to come. And this means that we can dwell on the negative moments when we've struggled or when we possibly felt like we were criticized, in comparison to when we were praised or others were cooperating with us. Now, I know for myself, I am very sensitive to this. And so I will always notice if I feel like I've struggled somewhere or if I've been criticized versus when someone gives me positive praise. It's like the positive praise rolls off a duck's back, whereas the other stuff can stick like glue. So just as we can train ourselves to be positive and condition how we respond, we need to do the same for our children. And we need to teach ourselves to acknowledge and see the good that we're doing. Now, the thing is that when we get overwhelmed and our brain shuts down, our common coping strategy for women in particular is that we start to distract ourselves from our reality. So distraction can come in a whole heap of different forms. It can be spending more time on social media. Maybe you're spending more time surfing the net, or you're online shopping. You're wasting time going through your inbox and just looking at emails. Maybe you listen to music and just totally zone out. It can be playing games on your phone. Possibly just surfing YouTube or binging on Netflix. It might be doing things like mindless eating, not even realizing that you're eating, you're just sitting in a spot and you're zoned out and just finish the whole bag of chips. It can just be not responding or even reacting to your children, or just zoning out in some shape or form. Now, these behaviors are a way of us distracting ourselves from our emotions and what's going on at the moment, and they're certainly not positive techniques that we want to be teaching our children. But the problem is when we mentally zone out, we do them without even realizing, and our children are around watching us, and they're learning how to react to stress and how to cope. These stress responses actually make the situation worse. So avoiding these uncomfortable feelings or these thoughts and these situations doesn't actually improve our ability to cope with it. It merely just pushes those emotions aside. Those tabs are still open. We're still dealing with that stress. That situation still exists, but the problem is we're not doing anything to be with it, cope with it, or find a solution. We're simply pushing it aside and not dealing with it in the moment. So rather than encouraging a settling of the mind at that time, This distraction, or those techniques that I've listed above, actually tends to work by adding more white noise and makes the situation worse because your brain is just on overdrive. So our children are the same as us. They need stress coping mechanisms, and these can work for children and adults of all ages, but bringing them in to make them a part of your family practice is really important, but they need to see you demonstrating them as well. So in the short term, you might find the distraction techniques more helpful, but the thing is, because it numbs your mind and gives you time out, but the thing is, in the long run, it doesn't provide the respite that you're actually looking for. It doesn't solve the problem. You don't feel any better. You get up, you've been unproductive, and nothing has shifted or moved from the situation that needs to be dealt with. Mindless distraction activities actually just divert your attention from your worried thoughts and your uncomfortable emotions, but they don't actually help you manage what's going on in your head. That's why I'm always talking about the techniques of meditation, journaling, gratitude, entering the stress-free zone, and prior planning. Because we know that all of these strategies help you cope with the emotions and the stress that you're feeling, dropping your baseline level of stress. Now, if you imagine that your stress is like a thermometer, and when you're hitting 30, you're flipping the lid. So you're really frustrated, possibly yelling at your kids, or totally becoming introvert. It depends whether you externalize or you internalize stress. Some people externalize stress, and so they're yelling and they're screaming, and they're getting frustrated, and they're saying things that they're possibly going to regret, probably being quite toxic in their relationships. Or some people internalize stress, so they hold it within. They can make themselves quite sick. They have very negative internal dialogue. They're telling themselves off. They're not doing anything to alleviate the problem. They might be emotionally eating. They become very introvert. And as a result of it, generally their immune system drops and they get sick themselves. So we're either making ourselves sick or we're making our relationships sick, whether you're internalizing or externalizing stress. Neither of them are beneficial. One is not better than the other. It's not better to internalize stress that you don't make your relationships worse, or to externalize stress and then make your relationships worse. Either way, it's toxic to yourself or to the others around you. The problem here is that when you're internalizing or you're externalizing your stress and you're at that point of 30 on the thermometer and you keep flipping the lid, you really just can't add any more to your plate. Your brain is not problem solving. It's not coping at all. So whenever I talk about a baseline stress level, what I want you to imagine is that we ultimately want our baseline stress to sit around, say, 18 to 20. It's a cool, comfortable area. You can add more to your plate. You don't feel like it's getting too hot. You don't feel like you're overwhelmed. You're coping with what's going on in the world. You're ready to up the ante. You feel like you've got a manage of what's on your plate, and you're feeling very good within yourself. Now, those techniques that are listed there, like meditation, journaling, gratitude practice, entering the stress-free zone, and being conscious with your prior planning around your non-negotiables and how you manage your time, they are what help you manage your stress. They're actual stress management techniques. Zoning out, spending time on YouTube, sitting and binge watching Netflix, they're not going to change the situation. That doesn't help you solve the problem that's in front of you. It sucks time out of your day, and then you're unproductive, and then it just has to accumulate somewhere else. So you end up having to catch up on jobs or things that you haven't completed elsewhere in your day, because you haven't mentally managed your mental state and that habit that's been formed as a result of when stress hits, how you respond and how you try to get away from it. Now, if you imagine that stress is the thermometer, ideally we want to be sitting between 18 and 20. That means that we're doing the meditation, the journaling, gratitude, stress-free zone, or prior planning on a daily basis, weekly basis. These things are scheduled into our routine consistently. Then that's ideally where we want to sit. The idea is that when more stuff gets packed on your plate, people are asking more of you, your family's demanding more of you, your work is ramping up, you're feeling like there's just too much going on in the house, you've got more expectations around the activities you need to take your children to, your time is being sucked everywhere, and you have got very little time for yourself, you're starting to sleep less, then what you'll find is that your baseline stress level will increase. So it'll end up ending up at 24, 25. You will start to feel a change in your physiology. Your brain gets busier. You start to feel more overwhelmed. You're more tense. You're starting to snap at people. Everyone has a different physiological response that they have to stress. And so you have to acknowledge what that looks like for you so that when you start to go up that scale, you're aware of how that's increasing. This also gives you the ability to bring in extra practices to try and drop your stress levels. The same for your children. You need to notice within them, how does their physiology change? What is their behavioral changes that occur? Now, I am going to talk about that later in this presentation about what to look for when you can see stress increase in the individuals around us. But being attuned to the people around you allows you to bring practices in that help try and calm the home and get everyone on the same page. If you notice that people are doing more distraction techniques around you, then their stress is increased and they're trying to avoid something or not necessarily deal with something. The idea is that you never really want your stress to get to a point where you're flipping the lid. If you're getting to a point and you're flipping the lid, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're shutting down, you're shutting people out, and perhaps responding or yelling in ways that you don't want to, those old patterns of behaviors that you just don't necessarily want to exhibit, and you're trying to break them and you're trying to be better than that response, then as soon as you get there, you have to work out, okay, what was it that I did not do well in the lead up to that event that got me to that point? What was that mental breakdown point, and what didn't I manage well in the lead up to that? This means that moving forward, you have a better idea as to what you need to be focusing on when times are becoming more stressful, and what will help you manage your stress in the lead up to that event, rather than allowing that to be a recurring cycle that you're stuck in. Now, I'm just going to give an example of myself about a month ago and what I saw happen within myself. So I'd had a particularly busy time because my husband was working away and I was managing my side of the business, managing his side of the business. And I also had my 3 kids. I also had my dad staying with me, and he's not a very helpful individual when it comes to doing stuff around the house. So my stress was very much elevated. I was also then putting pressure on myself as I was trying to work on some of my son's behavioral issues that had been coming forward. He'd been arguing a lot with us. And so I was trying to put in some really positive changes around that. Whenever I was trying to put in those positive changes, I felt like my dad was undoing it, because my dad was being very demonstrative and trying to intimidate our son into getting him to make changes, which is not the type of parent that I want to be, but very much the home that I grew up in. So being in this environment for about 6 weeks was causing me quite a lot of stress. As I felt so time poor, trying to manage my side of the business, the kids, husband's side of the business, the home, everything else, keep my dad happy, feeling like I'm walking on eggshells with him, what happened was I stopped entering the stress-free zone, and I also let my bedtime slip. So I wasn't meditating at night when I went to bed. I still consistently meditated in the morning, but I wasn't doing it before I would go to sleep. My journaling wasn't occurring as frequently. It wasn't happening every morning, because some mornings I'd get up and I would be packing Thrive instead of doing my journaling in the morning, because I just didn't have time. My gratitude was something that I was still consistent with, but I definitely know that my stress-free zone slipped away. So my prior planning around my non-negotiables regarding my food and my exercise is something that I'm good at, and that sticks with, because I've been doing it for a very long time now. I don't really have to think about it. But the prior planning around entering my stress-free zone had totally slipped. I wasn't taking time for myself, and I was working myself pretty much from 4:30 when I woke up until 10 or 10:30 at night every single day, and really just burning myself out. Then there was a few compounding events within that. My son had to be isolated because he was a close contact for COVID, and so I didn't have any time to myself, and I was trying to work at home and had the kids at home. And then also he and I both had gastro within that period of time. So it was just like a compounding series of events that builds you up to that point. I do believe that if I had been managing my stress well in the lead up to that, I would have coped far better with the end of what occurred there. Basically what happened was it got to the last week when my dad was staying with me, and my husband was due to come home on the Friday, and I had, I suppose, a mental breakdown pretty much on the Wednesday. I was yelling and I was crying and I was very overwhelmed, very stressed, not sleeping, because I just felt like I couldn't get on top of the workload. And then from that point, I just noticed this huge state of burnout. So those people that have listened to the training on your bridge to being unstoppable and about talking about the biochemical state, we know that when you drop below that 50% mark, that you lose all motivation, you lose all interest. By this point in the journey, given that I'd been 6 weeks into it and I hadn't been managing my stress, I hadn't been prioritizing myself, all of a sudden what happened was I just completely lost interest. I was struggling. I was getting out of bed and doing my workouts, but struggling when I got there because just not feeling motivated, feeling quite down, and just feeling really frustrated with my lack of interest and lack of motivation. Fortunately, because I have a background in this and I know what causes this, I reflected on what had occurred and how I was sleeping later, stressing more, not entering the stress-free zone, not prioritizing myself, not taking time out, feeling like everything else had to come before myself. And I could see what had led me to that point. And so I became very strict with myself, getting myself to bed earlier for a whole week, and I made myself enter the stress-free zone more frequently, take a step back and just allow a few things around the house to slide as I was able to just get myself back to my normal state. I went back to gratitude journaling more in the mornings, and then using that as a release to talk about what had happened and nut out for myself what it was that I was going to change and what I was going to focus on. And then I was able to then plan in when I was going to enter my stress-free zone again and get myself back to that point, meditating at night. So I understand that those things slip in and out. And as a parent, when we're in that state, we don't behave as our ultimate self. I wasn't necessarily taking it out on my children. I wasn't upset with my children at all during that period of time, but I was very frustrated and upset with my dad, and certainly took it out on my husband as well. In that moment, extroverting my stress management response, and I was making my relationships toxic, and I was also making myself feel quite sick, which is, I think, why we got gastro and I was quite run down and not sleeping and things like that, because I wasn't managing my stress well. When you go through something like that, you need to come out the other side and you need to think, okay, what am I going to do differently when I go into that again? Like, how, given the point that I got to there and how I responded and how that made me feel, the lack of motivation and energy and overwhelm that I experienced, how am I going to change that moving forward? And this is a constant work in progress. This is something that we're dedicated to for a really long time in improving, and we've got time to work on it. That's why this is a 40-year-long journey. But if you have to come out of a situation like that and reflect on what it was that you did that got yourself into that position, that's what taking responsibility for your health looks like. It's understanding that, yes, okay, there was lead-up events. No, things weren't ideal. I could have sat there and I could have blamed the fact that my husband has to work away. Or I could have blamed the fact that my dad is a challenging human. But I also had to take responsibility for the fact that I hadn't managed myself within that. And I had prioritized work and running the house over the top of my own personal needs during that period of time. And that's what led to that breakdown in my mental state. Now, something I realized is during that period of time is that I was probably starting, when I would try to get to bed, I'd then spend time on social media, Instagram or Facebook or something like that, and then waste time. And that was the form of distraction that I was going into at night, predominantly because I was trying to avoid my dad. I didn't like the emotions that were coming up as he was trying to parent my son. That was bringing up trauma from when I was younger and how he used to parent me, which caused me a lot of stress because I didn't want that to be passed on to my child. But instead of dealing with that and dealing with the individual and saying something, because it was very confrontational, I was then spending time on my phone at night when I should have been asleep, 10:30 at night. So what I want you to do is look within the booklet, and I want you to write down the forms of distraction that you engage in across the week, or when you're in a really stressed state, what comes more into your life as a form of distraction. Now, in those moments that I was spending on social media, I should have really have been journaling, meditating, putting on a face mask and having a bath, or doing something that allowed me mental downtime, even sitting outside with the cool breeze at night, having a cup of tea, whatever it is, creating space for myself to process what was going on. And the thing with the meditation is our brain processes stress and emotions through our thoughts. There is no other way that our body processes stress. It's through our thoughts and emotions. So if you don't create a space for those thoughts and emotions to exist, you may not like the thoughts and emotions. You may not want to deal with them. They may make you feel really uncomfortable. But if you don't create a space for that, is going to sit on top of your shoulders and it is going to consume you. And so you have to create a experience that allows those thoughts and emotions to exist. So for meditation, you can listen to meditations that are around healing or overcoming emotions, or it might be on something like increasing your confidence or overcoming anxiety, or there's all types of meditations that you can listen to that help you deal with that state that you're in. Journaling also helps get it out of your head and get it onto paper and helps you start to navigate it. And I'm going to also go through within this tutorial a strategy that's going to help you nut out what you are or are not in control of and what is your next step forward. Gratitude shifts your state from this place of I don't have enough, I'm inadequate, to focusing on what you do have and what you are in control of, and also what is in your capacity to make change to. So gratitude is really important for giving yourself credit for where you're actually now. And also we can't be in two states of mind. You can't be happy and you can't be sad at the same time. So moving over to a grateful state and doing gratitude journaling allows that shift in mindset, which of course relieves those feelings of anxiety, worry, depression, those sorts of things. So instead of doing practices where you're distracting yourself or you're removing yourself from the habits that are not necessarily helping the situation, like surfing on YouTube or binge watching Netflix or online shopping or whatever those distraction techniques are, it's good for you to think, okay, what could I replace that with? What could I put in that space instead? And then just focus on one that you're going to work on and then try and bring that more into your practice on a daily basis. So on that page 4 there, you can have a reflection and start to fill in a few ideas of what you might like to do there. So I just want you to reflect on this. Like any other organ in the body, there are many reasons why the function of the human brain might be temporarily impaired. We have to remember it's an organ, right? And in order for it to function properly, we need to be giving it what it needs. Its capacity to process and recall information, or even think creatively and manage strong emotions, can all be profoundly compromised by experiences such as simple as sleep deprivation. So as I'm always talking about this biochemical state and the primary needs of our body, our nutrition, our hydration, and our stress and our sleep need to be managed. When those things start to slip apart, our brain cannot cope. And so the extra expectations that we're putting ourselves instantly start to slip away. Now, if your nutrition and your hydration is not on track, not only do you lack energy and motivation, but of course you're going to be diving into more of those distraction techniques. When you're stressed, people turn to distraction techniques because they can't deal with the thoughts and the emotions that their body is trying to process. And when you have lack of sleep, that makes you exhausted, have less willpower, less motivated, and then of course distraction techniques are wonderful because you can just sit there and literally numb out. So you can see how these distraction techniques can form a basis of managing stress or lack of hydration or lack of sleep. And if you're not careful, they're techniques that your children can take on and a whole family unit can take on as a way of avoiding what's actually going on. So I want you to consider, have you ever noticed that you handle challenging situations differently when you're either tired, when you haven't eaten healthy, when you're dehydrated? Now, I would say that we all know that we handle situations very differently when we're in that state. And I want you to consider, is there a typical way that you respond or that you feel about yourself or your life when your biochemical needs are not being met, compared to when those needs are being met? In your booklet on pages 5 and 6, you have the opportunity to write down some of the changes you notice within yourself when you're tired, not eating healthy, dehydrated, or stressed, and then how that starts to change the way that you perceive yourself and what you think that you're capable of. Because of course, once that internal dialogue starts to shift, we start to doubt ourselves. It changes the energy and what we're willing to give our time to, and then all of a sudden our actions aren't in alignment with ultimately who we want to be. So let's talk about your children, your partner, and your extended family. All of them need to have their biochemical needs met in order for them to be able to back themselves and show up as their best self. We are all impacted by these fundamental basics of nutrition, hydration, sleep, and stress. Now, as a family unit, we've covered your nutrition and we've talked about hydration. We've also spoken about sleep routines. But how do you manage your stress as a family and in turn teach your children these lifelong skills of stress management? Know that your children around you will emulate your strategies, whether the coping mechanisms are healthy or unhealthy. So let's do our best to make sure that they're healthy coping mechanisms. So how can you identify stress in children? So children, like adults, interpret stresses differently. So as professionals or parents or community members, it's really important for us to watch for warning signs that stress might be moving towards a toxic level, so appropriate interventions can be implemented with children. So some key indicators of childhood stress can include the following. There will be a change in their mood. You'll notice that there's a shift in their sleeping patterns. It might be harder to get them to sleep. They might be wanting to sleep more, or they might be awake more. There'll be changes in their eating habits. Suddenly they might be off their diet, or they might be consuming even more food. They might be trying to isolate themselves, lock themselves in their room more, or indulge in the distraction techniques that we were talking about before, watching more devices and just not engaging. You might notice that there is a lack of interest in your children in things that were previously interesting to them. There could be a pervasive anger and they just seem to be cross all the time and talking back. There could be increased agitation. There could be spacing out. There could be a decrease in their energy. They might be struggling to concentrate and they might complain of having stomach aches. So how can you support your kids at home? Support yourself and support your partner. We want to provide an arena for children to discuss their daily activities because this really helps them put situations in proportion and gives them perspective. Allowing them to open up and talk about what's going on gives them an avenue to discuss what is on their mind and what's sitting on their shoulders. So in the home environment, where and when are the times that you and adults and the children can talk about their day? Now, I know for myself, when I was a student support worker and I was working in high schools, particularly with boys and girls that were closed down and struggled to talk, I would do things like take them for a walk with me around the oval. So I'd take them out and just walk around the school and just talking to them about random stuff. So just talking about their friendship circle and how things were going. And I would not discuss their mental health or what's going on in their personal life at all. I'd be very superficial, low, shallow stuff. After about 15 minutes, when the child was feeling more comfortable with standing next to me and talking to me, then I would start to ask more questions like, how's things going? What's going on in that classroom? What's going on with that friend lately? And ask more questions that are in depth around that individual's mental health, what's going on with their family, how that child's fitting in socially, what they're experiencing. The thing with young girls and boys is they're often ashamed of what they're going through and they don't necessarily know how to express those emotions. And so you have to create a space where they don't feel like they're being interrogated. If it's just one-on-one in a car and you're with your child and you have the opportunity to talk to them and it's a longer car trip, then that's a great space to get that individual to open up. But if there's other children in the car, it's probably not a good idea to be interrogating the child about how their day was, what happened with the teacher, was that child your friend today, did you get bullied, whatever it might be. It's not a good idea to be bringing that up in that moment. If you know that something is causing your child stress, then you need to create a space for that child to talk to you. It could be you're cooking in the kitchen and then you're making something together and then you're talking about what's going on. Or it could be you're doing homework together and then you're just having idle chit chat. And then after a while, when your child feels comfortable and they've been sitting with you for a while, then they're willing to open up. I've always found, predominantly with girls and boys of the teenage era, year 6, which is about 10 years old, up until about 18, because that's predominantly the age group that I've dealt with, then I always found that whenever I went for a walk with them, that would create an opening and a space for them to relax, to feel calm. The fresh air was always good. And then eventually they would open up and they'd tell me what was going on. They also felt a sense of trust with me because I wasn't interrogating them. I wasn't putting the hard word with them. I wasn't sitting across for them and asking them all these hard questions. I was just simply having a conversation with them and giving them a space to talk if they wanted to. So think for yourself about when you're trying to support your children around their stress, where do you create openings to talk to your child and just to discuss what's going on? Once your child has opened up to you and they're talking about what the problems are and what they're dealing with, then you can start to provide solutions. Don't stop and stare at them and start to talk. If they're talking about being bullied in the school, don't stop and look at them and be like, oh, that can't happen, and start going on. That's not what they want. They don't want to make a scene of it. They want you to listen. They want you to listen and they want to feel heard, but they don't want to feel like they're going to be interrogated or that it's going to cause more issues at school or that there's going to be more people spoken to, because that's what they're afraid of. They don't want attention to be drawn to this. Rather than reacting when you hear information, you have to continue to walk the same pace if you're walking with them or if you're cooking or whatever activity you're doing with them, riding a bike, whatever it is that works with your child. Maybe you're at the skate park. Think open-mindedly about what your child loves to do and where they're in their comfortable environment, and then try and engage in that activity and open conversation up in that, because they're already comfortable doing something that they enjoy. And then have a discussion with them about, okay, this is what I recommend. This is what you're in control of. This is what I can do to support you. And then you want them to get to a stage where they want you to help them, or they want to go and they want you to talk to somebody on their behalf, or they want you to take action. But they have to okay it. You can't say, I'm going to the school and I'm doing this and this if they don't want you to, because the problem is that if they lose that level of trust, they don't trust you anymore. They're not going to tell you what is going on because they're worried that you're going to make the situation worse by going to the school or talking to teachers or talking to friends parents or whatever it might be. And I understand that as a parent, you can be so emotionally involved because you care so much about your children, but you have to be mindful of the trust and the respect that you have for your child, and that you don't want to break that bond. So it's very special that you create that and you create a space where they can talk to you openly and honestly. And then you need to make sure you nurture that by respecting what their requests are. If they don't want you to go to anybody, then you need to come up with a strategy of what your child can do to change the circumstances, and you need to give them strategies. Later in this PowerPoint, in about 2 slides time, I'm going to talk about the strategy I used to use with children and what I used to work through with them, and that has always worked, whether I used it with children or I used it with clients, in helping them understand what they're in control of, how they can manage their stress, and then how they can be supported by external parties. So note that some families use the time in the car to discuss issues, and others might find having a game night or watching TV together as a time where the children can express what's going on for them. Trying to walk with your children is always an excellent way to provide some downtime and to open up that discussion. Ideally, what we want children to know that they have the support of their primary caregivers, and that then they're more likely to discuss the troubling issues if there's not going to be consequences, not going to be blowouts and not going to be huge responses. It has to be calm, cool, and collected as you absorb the information, and then you work out what you're going to do to support your child with that information moving forward. So providing more support at home. You want to encourage the members of the family to share what they're grateful for. This helps shift a child who's struggling with stress from focusing on what's going on at school or what they're feeling overwhelmed with or their inability to perform within subjects, whatever it might be, their fights with the siblings, the arguments they might be having with their father. You need to create a space that they are getting their brain to tune into what is working for them. You could be completing a gratitude practice with them. Another idea is that you get them to listen to meditations as they fall asleep if you're noticing a change in their sleep patterns. Getting them to listen to meditations before they fall asleep as a calming the mind strategy, and also it's a great distraction strategy. And you want to probably work out as well, just as we have to enter the stress-free zone, because we know what happens when we don't, and when it accumulates and things build up and we start to have a mental breakdown. We have to do the same for our children. So it could be things like playing a sport, getting them outside, possibly reading a book or doing some coloring in. Something that's not a distraction technique like watching TV or diving into a device, but more a mindfulness activity, which is being present in the moment, which happens when you play sport or you're outside in the trees or playing at a park or you're reading a book or you're coloring in. You have to be present for those activities. As I mentioned before, you can encourage your children to listen to meditations or audiobooks. And you just want to open a space where you can discuss any challenges that they have coming up. So you can say, what do you think is going to be a challenge next week? Or can you see any problems? Or is there anything that we're worried about occurring next week? Or have you got any worries about school tomorrow? Or if they're going to a party, what do you think might be happening there? Have you got any worries about what's going to happen at the party? And just allow them to talk to you about what's coming up in the future and what might be on their mind and what they're worried about. And then talk to them about ways to respond, to deal with that stress, and also what they're in control of moving into that event. Now, talking about the stress identification task, this document here can be downloaded within the resources tab of this module. So I have uploaded in there. I always found this really helpful whenever I was working with clients of any age, whether they be children or adults. It just really helps you mentally nut out what is actually going on at the moment and what you're in control of and what you can take action on, rather than feeling like everything is out of your control and it's just happening to you. We are always in control of whether it even just be our emotions or our responses or what we choose to think about. We get to choose that. And so we need to teach our children that as well. Just getting them to write out, okay, what is the worst case scenario? What are they stressed about? What's the trigger and what's the upcoming thing? And you could talk about, okay, what would he say, or what would she say, or how would you respond, or what do you worry is going to happen? And then what would be the outcome of that? And then how would that make you feel? So you're going through the whole scenario of what that looks and feels like for them. Then you have to talk about, okay, what would be the best case scenario? If everything went to plan and everything was fine, what are the things that we really ideally want to happen there? And then knowing what the worst case scenario and what the best case scenario is, what is your actual action strategy? What are you in charge of? What can you manage? And this might be like a child might be worried about not fitting in the social event. And you could help them with getting ready for the event and making sure that they're wearing something that they feel comfortable in. You could make sure that they possibly have a support friend, and then you could take the friend with them to the party so that they feel like they're rocking up with somebody. You could make sure that they're present and all that was organized in advance so they weren't stressing about that. You can make sure that they have a support network when they're there, or perhaps if there were food intolerances or anything like that's been dealt with the family prior. But you're trying to and if they're worried about not fitting in or not being able to make conversation or any of those things that come up for kids, it's about providing them with strategies. Okay, what could you do? But don't forget, this also works for you as an adult. When you're in the depths of something and you're trying to deal with something and you're feeling consumed, like you don't have control, this very strategy works for you as well. And so you writing out, what is your worst case scenario? What is your best case scenario? What are you in charge of? What action can you take? What is in your control? Helps you mentally let go of the stress and just focus on what is listed here. So using this for your children, for your partner, for yourself, is a really positive strategy, and teaches children that, yes, there are things that are out of our control at the moment, and you don't necessarily always get to choose how it's going to look, but you have to be okay with understanding that, yes, the worst case scenario can exist, but when you have put into play your action strategy, then you've done everything in your power to get that best case scenario. And if that doesn't come about, then you can't blame yourself, because it's not on your shoulders anymore. You've done what you can because you've followed and you've thought about that action strategy. So just want to discuss some general stress management techniques for the whole family unit. So it's really important that we teach children to be aware of how they're breathing. We have to remember that stress is both physiologically and psychological. Okay, so breathing deeply brings more oxygen into the brain. This lowers the negative effects of the hormones that create symptoms of stress. So when a child starts to get stressed, just say, like, how are you breathing at the moment? Take a big deep breath, calm down. It's okay, I'm here to help you. If you can hear that they're like almost hyperventilating, then you know that they're going to get themselves into a workup state. And of course, hyperventilating causes greater anxiety in the body, because the body's just not getting enough oxygen. And so it does start to trigger those emotions as well. So explain to them that when you are feeling stressed, if you take deep breaths, it does calm you down and allows you to problem solve better. They need to learn that as well. Discuss with children how they have control over their lives. The problem is stress always stems from feeling a loss of control. And this is a really common symptom of stress. When we start to feel out of control, like everybody's doing things to us and we can't do anything about it, then that's when we start to get overwhelmed. So we need to work with our children so they can see that they do have control and that of the things that they can, which is their action strategy, and that they can decide to make changes to reduce their stress. So they can manage how they can bring stress management techniques into their daily routine. So meditating before bed so they get a better night's sleep and they don't lay awake feeling anxious. They could be meditating throughout the night if they're old enough to use a device on their own. You could get them to do journaling techniques so that whatever they're stressed and they're worried about is getting out of their brain. This can also involve the stress management. This can also involve the eliminating stress document that I was referring to in the you can get them to do a gratitude practice so that they realize that even though there is chaos going around or they're feeling uneasy or they're feeling overwhelmed, that there are still things that are going really well in their lives. And you can also get to them to feel like they've got a sense of control by getting them to prior plan what's coming up and how they're going to respond and what they could do to preempt the best outcome for that situation. So whenever I'm talking about prior planning, it's about looking forward and working out, okay, what can I put in place to bring about the best outcome for this? So we need to teach our children to be aware of how their body reacts to stress in the early stages. Just as with ourselves, we start to feel our palms getting sweaty, we can feel our breath rising, our chest and our heart is starting to beat faster, our brain's starting to race. Our children experience those same emotions, but they don't understand that this is a stress response and it's leading them up to a point where they're starting to feel overwhelmed. So it's really important that you teach them to look for that with themselves. Say, do your palms get to start to sweat, or does your eyes start to twitch, or do you start to want a certain toy or a comforter, or is there somewhere that you want to go, or that you feel like your thoughts, there's too much going on in your head? Teaching them to recognize those early symptoms and helping children have a plan for what they do when these symptoms appear can really help them learn to keep their stress under control, just as it does for an adult. We also need to make sure that we provide downtime for our children. In our modern day of technology and external stimulation, many of our children don't actually have time to just relax and reflect on how they're feeling. They're using distraction techniques so frequently that they just don't have mental downtime. They don't actually get an opportunity to experience and process their stress and their emotions, or their thoughts and their emotions as a result of stress. So teach children to think about how they feel and make family relaxation a part of maintaining your overall health and wellness for your children and for the family alike. So having family downtime, outings where there's no devices, getting out and playing a game of soccer, or going for a walk together, or exploring a new park, whatever it is that allows you to connect as a family and gives you some downtime together so that you can all reconnect. Thank you so much for joining me in this session on stress management for the modern woman and her family. And I really hope you found some insights and some strategies that are valuable for creating a more balanced and supportive home environment, and that are going to work for your unit. Now, if you'd like to access more of my free trainings, please head over to inspiredmama.com. There you're going to find a whole heap of resources designed to help you manage your stress, improve your family communication, and just boost your overall well-being as a family unit. We talk about stress management, time management, and managing our fatigue, because they're the things that keep women afloat. If you want to have daily inspiration, please follow me on social media. You can find me at Instagram at Chels_InspiredMama, on YouTube at Inspired Mama, or on Facebook at InspiredMama_Chels. If you're looking for ongoing support to implement what you've learned today and beyond, I invite you to join our incredible support network, which is the Inspired Mama Support Group on Facebook. It's a wonderful community where my team and I provide guidance and encouragement to busy mums like you on your journey to a healthier and more balanced life. Remember, ladies, that these small changes that you make to your family unit can make some really big results. So if you're able to implement these strategies today, you'll watch how they'll transform your family's approach to stress and just the overall well-being and state of your family unit. Thank you again for your time and your attention, and here's to creating a home that has resilient, connected, and inspired, loving members.